Alright, Chapter 11, Literature, Learning Objectives. In this chapter you will learn 11.1, understand general guidelines reading literature. 11.2, identify strategies for reading and analyzing poetry. 11.3, identify strategies for reading and interpreting short stories. 11.4, identify strategies for reading and interpreting novels. Now, many of the study of the literature share love for the subject, while all of the study to do just to satisfy a college requirement. Regardless of your reason for studying literature, you may have made a wise decision. Literature class is valuable because they help you learn to read, write, think critically, argue a point. Furthermore, literature can be personally enriching because it focuses on human experience. Great works of literature classics have studied the test of time that represent the universal universal truth, yearnings, and themes. These themes are applicable to live in your life, the world around you. Finally, an important purpose of the reading literature is to enhance skills, interpretation, and analysis skills that are critical for learning in life. Example: the poetry, short story, novel selection of the chapter. Approach them with a fresh mind, positive attitude. Resolve to discover the unusual universal truth or theme in each piece of literature. In addition to these works, examples, you will read a poem by Robert Frost, Road Not Taken, in which explores the life choices of the decision-making of the short story The Black Cat by Edgar Allan Poe. An example given the downfall of the main result of alcoholism. Chapter 1, Charles Dickens' Great Expectations presents a main character, Pip, an orphan who becomes to explore relationships with others, starting with deceased family members, and also a criminal he encounters at church graveyard. What to expect when reading literature. Understand the general guidelines of the reading literature. Many students will take at least one or two literature classes in college. Here are some general guidelines of reading literature. Expect to do a good deal of reading and writing. Literature courses may carry a heavy reading load. They also require the students to write several papers each semester, take the essay exams. Do well in literature course, you must have the willing read for the books and pay poems, plays, short stories, and essays written with greater thinking. Adjust your reading speed if necessary. It's possible to reading some works quickly. Examples: light-hearted works, novels such as Cervantes' Don Quixote is quite fun, pleasant reading. While poetry looks short, it can take some time to fully comprehend with each line and understand with how language you've identified with the poem's main theme. Consequently, read carefully, slow, paying attention to the language. For example, to observe the word choice, syntax, or order arrangement ideas. Accept the review of the work several times. Expect to read the work several times. A single reading is generally not sufficient if you understand literature works adequately. During the first reading, try to become familiar with the work of the literal and factual level. Establish what you do, what, who did it, what, when, where. On the second, subsequent readings, focus on writer's message on significant work. And expect to note as you read to understand the message. Jot down with your reactions, hunches, insight, feelings, questions. Make words, phrases that provide clues to the meaning, underlying words, sentences, actions as you feel important. Expect to look for a message and interpretation and focus on the themes and patterns of the word. Literature expresses the meaning, the creative, the feeling, and impression. Always analyze and evaluate. Focus on work significant library merit. For more, look for the meaning in the word nuisances, images, and symbols. Be aware of cultural differences, how they affect the meaning of the interpretation. Think critically. Critical thinking is essential for the literature class as you are asked to synthesize, analyze, and evaluate what you are reading. Expect to write for a review. Write plots and summaries and short summaries to make sure that they understand the key events and the characters by brief outlines and literary essays. Write a statement of the interpretation of the poem. Other literary works for this statement will be useful with the prepared exams and select topics papers. Reading and analyzing poetry. 11.2, identifying strategies reading and analyzing poetry. Poems are written in verses, lines, stanzas rather than paragraphs. Often reading a poem takes more time, requires greater concentration other than types of other materials. Reading prose, you skip the word and paragraph. Your comprehension of the whole paragraph will not suffer. Poetry, in contrast, is very compact, precise. Each word is important, carries the special meaning. You may have to pay attention to each word, its sounds, connotations, meanings, and combine with other words. Reading the following poem. When I was 1 and 20, once they refer back, and I'm ready to study the following guidelines. When I was 1 and 20, I heard a wise man say, give crowns and pounds and guineas. But not your heart away, give the pearls away with the rubies, but keep your fancy free. But I was 1 and 20, not used to talk to me. When I was 1 and 20, I heard him say again, the heart of the bosom was never given in vain. This paid what size or plenty, and I sold endless true, and I am 21 and 1 and 20, and oh, it's true, it's true. Houseman A. Palm 313 from Shawfire's Land, 1896. Read poems one straight through. Be open with the experience of the poem you read. If they encounter unknown word, confusing reference, keep the reading of the poem with the second line to identify and resolve the difficulties identified. For example, look up the meaning of the unfamiliar word. You will find that you know the most meaning of the words. And when I was 120, we may, however, need to look up the word fancy or root. A punctuation guide or comprehension. Although poetry is written in lines, but do not expect the line to make sense itself. Meaning often flows from line to line, eventually from forming a sentence. And using punctuation guide as you reading the paragraph. There is no punctuation at the end of the line. Consider with a slight pause, with emphasis on the last word. Punctuation when I was 1 and 20 is the same as the story had been written in prose, with both stanza verses and the couplets. Pairs of successive lines are punctuated identically. Semicolons indicate the continuation of the sentence. Also, the poet using the quotation marks conveys a sense of authenticity, as though it indicated the mentor's exact words to the young man. 3. Notice the action. What's doing, who's doing what, and when, and where. The exact action of it is unknown, but the time is obvious. The young man is 22nd year in the poem. The young man recounting the times of the wise man shared of some advice to him. In light of the poem, interested when I was written, with accomplished with describe the feeling of the verse, expressed with the memory present of the argument at some other goal. A&E Houseman expressed the young man's memory of the time when ignored, when a wise man advice offered him hope, saving others the same painful mistake of giving their heart away. Determine who is speaking. Poems are often read with the identified with the I or we, who try to describe the speaker's viewpoint with the feelings I of the poem as a young man. Not only does he come in acceptance for the wise man's advice, but he also realizes his immaturity at the age as 21-year-old. To find the speaker's tone, the author's serious challenge, saddened, frustrated, of the read aloud with the intonation, the emphasis with certain words, the rise and fall of the voice may provide clues. You may hear the poet's anger, sadness, and elation, although structural rhyme and rhythm of when I was 1 and 20 create almost childish mood and tone of the author is serious, sorrowful, and regretful. 7. Identify whom the poem is addressed. It is written within person to the read and an object. For example, the John Keats Ode of the Grecian urn, Ode on the Grecian urn, written in an intimate object in an urn or vase. Consider the possibility of the poem written to work a problem and emotionally out the love of this universal time, so it's probably with the A.E. Houseman addressing this problem to audience for the young man and woman, warning them of the danger of giving away their hearts. It's possible that Houseman made same mistakes as a young speaker. 8. Read difficulty, confusing selections aloud several times, copying the section word for word may be helpful. Check unfamiliar references. Poet may refer to people, objects, events outside of the poem. References known as an allusion. You need to consult with the reference source to fully understand the poem. Momentary units of crown, pounds, guineas may be terms that are unfamiliar to you. Check with the reference, for it will clear up the confusion and lead to better understanding of the poem. 10. Look for the poet's meaning and the poet's theme. Consider the connection figures of speech express the poem in your own words connected to your own experience. Then put all the ideas together to discover all the overall meaning. Ask yourself, what is poetry telling me? What is the message? Is closely reading throughout with the analyze the connection. When I was 1 and 20, to your own experience, you may discover the poet is suggesting the youth of a naive, unprepared, and experience real love, or maybe youth give their heart away, or you will suffer. Individual interpretations may vary. Selection 4, The Road Not Taken, the Roberts Roth, with the appropriate American poet known for his poem with the rural life. He awarded with the Pulitzer Prize for the poetry 4 times per half with the known for his poem with the New England, about New England, often examine the relationship between humanity and nature. Previewing with the reading, previewing does not work on the well with the poetry. Instead, previewing with the poem, read it once, determine literal content, who's doing what, when, where, when you have finished, answer the following questions. With a decision poet and no error trying to make. What was the poet saying? Make the connection. Think about some of the major decisions you made in your life. The options did you face at the time? Did you make your decision? How did you make your decision? How did you think of the decision affected your life? What do you make the different choice if you had to do it all over again? Art reading tip: read the poem at least twice. First time, work with literal understanding of what happens with the poem. Second time, pay more attention to the poem structure, read the pattern. And the road not taken at some of the margin, the word wanted is standard for lack. 2 roads diverged in yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, but one traveler long I stood, and looked down on one as far as I could, to where it bent undergrowth, and took the other just as fair, having perhaps the better claim, because of the grass he wanted lacked where, though as passing there had worn really about the same, and both mourning equally lay leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for the another day, yet knowing how it leads unto the way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took one less traveled, and by that has made all the difference. And that's Frost, Robert. Road not taken a mountain interval, New York Country Halt, 1921. First stanza implies the speaker of the poem is on a journey, which for the following best states the poem's theme. It's better to take the road less traveled. All of the poem stanzas take place in the past tense, except for the stanza. I can't answer the question out with looking back. Call over the woods, and the first stanza is a clue to precise location of the poem's action. Which lines from the poem imply speaker is fairly young. C, stanza 3. At the time day does the poem take place at? Probably noon. Speaker of the poem has a quick and spontaneous moving on. Alright, the story of an hour. Knowing Mrs. Mallard was affected with her heart trouble, great care was taken break with her generally as possible knew with her husband's death. And it was her sister Josephine who told her broken sentences, veiled hints of the reveal in half concealing. Her husband, friends, Richard was too, and near her it was he who had been in the newspaper off with the intelligence railroad disaster was received with the Brenton Mallard's name of the leading of the list killed, but he had only taken the time to assure himself of the truth of the second telegram and had hastened to forestall as any least careful, less tender friend being bearing a sad message. She did not hear this story as many women have heard the same, the paralyzed inability to accept the significance writhing. She wept once, and with sudden wild abandonment in her sister's arm. When the story of the grief had spent itself, she went away to her room alone. She would not have no one follow her. There stood a face in the open window, comfortable with a roomy armchair and two, but she sank, pressed down with physical exhaustion, haunted her body and seemed to reach their soul. She could see the open square her house, tops of the trees that out quivered with a new spring life. The delicious breath of the rain was in the air. The street below the peddler was crying his wares. Notes of a distant song with someone with a singing reached there faintly. Countless sparrows were twittering in the eaves. Their patches of blue sky showing here and there through the clouds. He met the piled one above the other west facing her window. She sat up, her head thrown back over the cushion of the chair, quite motionless, except that a sob came up into her throat, shook her, and the child has cried itself. The sleep continues to sob in the dreams. She was young, and with a fair, calm face whose lines bespoke repression, even with a curtain strength, but now with a dull star air in her eyes, with a gaze that was fixed away beyond her, one of those patches of blue sky. It was not a glance of reflection, but rather an indication of suspension and intelligent thought. There was something coming to her. She was waiting for it fearfully. Well, who was it? She did not know. It was subtly elusive name, but she felt it creeping out of the sky, recording toward her through the sounds and sense of the color as filled with the air. Now her bosom rose and felt tremulously. She began to recognize the thing was approaching that possesses her, and she was striving better to back it with her will, as powerless as two white, slender hands would have been. When she abandoned herself, whispered the word, escaped with the slightly parted lips, and she said over and over under that breath, free, vacant stare of the look and the terror of the fowl that went from her eyes. They stated in keen brought. Her pulse beat fast, and cursed blooding warmed and relaxed every inch in her body. She did not stop to ask if he were demonstrably joy to that had held her. A clear and exalted perception enabled her to dismiss the suggestion of trivial. She knew she would weep again, and she saw the kind of tender hands fold in death. The face had never looked seen who loved upon her, fixed the gray and dead, but and she saw beyond the bitter moment of the long procession of the years to come, what would belong to her absolutely. She opened them and spread with her arms for the welcome. They would be no one live with during her coming years. She would live with herself. There would be no more powerful bending her, no powerful with bending hers than blind persistence with men and women believing that they right to impose the private will upon fellow creature, kind with the intention, with the cruel intention made act seemed no less the crime. She looked up on a brief moment of illumination, and yet she loved him sometimes, and when she did not, what did it matter? What could love and unresolved mystery count for in the face of the possession of self-assertion, which she suddenly recognized with the trunks impulse of the being free, body of the soul free? She kept whispering. Josephine was kneeling before the closed door with the lips a keyhole, imploring the admission. Louise, open the door. I beg, open the door. I will make yourself ill. It will make yourself ill. What are you doing, Louise? For heaven's sake, open the door. Go away. I'm not making myself ill. No, she's drinking very elixir of life through the open window. Her fancy was running along. Those days were ahead of her. Spring days and summer days, all sorts of the days that would be her own. She breathed a quick prayer of life might be long. It was only yesterday she thought the shorter that life may be long, and she rose the length of the open door to her sister's important duties. There were feverish triumphs in her eyes, and she carried herself unwittingly to God's victory. It's like a goddess of victory. She clasped her sister's waist, and together descended the chairs. Richard stood waiting for them at the bottom. Someone was opening the front door with a latch key with a bright Marley entered in a little travel stain, composedly carrying up the gripsack and an umbrella. He had been far from the scene of the accident, did not know even there had been one. He amazed at Josephine's piercing cry, Richard's quick motion to screen him from the view of his wife, but Richard was too late. When the doctors came in, they said she had died from a heart disease of the joy of kills. Are the six elements of the short story. Look at these elements for the plot. With the plot, the basic structure of the sequence of events, they occur with the work, with the focus of the conflict, also follow with the predictable structure of the plot, with the frequency, begin with the thing, with the scene, introduce the main character, provide with the background information needed to follow with the story, with the next of the there is often complication or problem arises, suspense build with the problem, conflicts unfold, and near the end of the story, event and reach of the climax, the point which outcome of the resolution of the conflict will decide, but the conclusion quickly follows. The story ends. A plot with a story of an hour involved with a surprising end. With Mr. Mallard learns that her husband has been killed in a railroad disaster. She ponders his death and releases the freedom it will bring. At the end of the relishes the freedom it will bring. At the end of the story, the Mr. Mallard discovers that her husband is not dead after all, and she suffers a heart attack and dies. Alright, the setting is the time and the place, with the circumstance, number of the action, the crew, with the provide, with the mode, atmosphere, with the which the kind characters interact. The setting with the story of an hour, it is the Mallard's home, and take place with the room in the course of 1 hour. Characters are the actor of the narrative story, with the real themselves, with which they say with the dialogue, with by their actions, appearing with the thought, with the feelings of the narrator and the person who tells the story, but must also comment with the reveal information about the characters as you read, analyze the characters, traits and motives, also analyze with their personalities and watch for the character changes of the show you have with the characters related to one another. In a story of an hour, the main character, Mrs. Millard, her thoughts and reactions are learned about the husband's supposed death of the cruise are the crux of the story. Point of view. Point of view refers to what the story is presented with the person of the presented or the person from who the perspective of the story is told. Often the story is not told with the narrator perspective of the story, but may be told with the perspective of one of the characters or that of the unknown narrator, but the analyzing the point of the view, determining of the role of the function of the narrator, reliable and knowledgeable. Sometimes narrator is able to enter the minds of some of all the characters, knowing with the thoughts and the understanding of their reaction, motivation. Other story of the narrator may understand the actions and implications of the event in history. A study of an hour is told in a third-person narrator whose knowledge understands the character's action motives, but is not part of the action. In this story, the last line of the narrator tells the doctor, assume that Mr. Mallard died of joy of that Mrs. Mallard died of the joy that kills. Tone. The tone of the mood story reflects the author's attitude. Like a person tone of the voice of the tone suggests the feeling of the main ingredients that contributed to the tone, including the author's choice of the detailed character setting, etc. The language that is used for the tone of the story may be, for example, the humorous, ironic, and tragic of the author's feeling, but it is not necessary those characters narrate. Instead, it is through the narrator description of the character of their actions were to infer tone. In the story of the hour, the tone might be described as a series of serious events dramatically about Mrs. Mallard's life. And the story also has elements of surprise and hilarity. Was surprised to learn that Mr. Mallard is not dead after all. It's ironic the opposite of what she expected to learn that Mrs. Mallard dies of a joy that kills. The theme of the story, of the meaning of the message, of the main idea, of the main point, of the themes of the often larger and universal ideal, the life, of the death, the human values, existence, the establishment of the real theme. The theme, ask yourself what author trying to say about life by telling a story. Try to explain a single sentence. One of them, the stories of the freedom of the hour. One of the theme of the story of an hour is freedom. Mrs. Mallard experiences a sense of freedom, opening and learning her husband is supposed dead. She sees a long procession of years to come that would belong to her absolutely. There's almost a theme of rebirth was suggested by reference of the springtime her life without husband was just beginning. The author also may be commenting on the restricted respirative nature of marriage during the time the story was taken. After Mr. Mallard's death, there would be no powerful will bending hers. Mrs. Mallard, after all, dies not losing her husband, but the thought of losing her newly found freedom. If you have difficulty stating the theme, trying the following suggestions. Stay with the title. Now that you have read the story, does it take a new meaning? In light of the main characters, do they change? If so, how they react, in reaction to what? Look for the broad general statements, what do the character of the narrator say about the life of the problems they face. Look for the symbols, figurative expression meaningful names. For example, the Mrs. Goodhart was the object for the hint of the larger idea. Selection 5 of The Black Cat, Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe is the famous prolific American writer of the West, best known for the poetry and short stories during the short life of 1809 to 1849. Struggled financially, tragic experience with the alcoholism, rejection, disheartening of the depression that can be seen writing many of his works, such as The Story of the Tall Tale Heart, of The Pit of the Pendulum, and the poem The Raven, are now considered the classic work of the literature. Pope the creative that introduced the Gothic style of the American literature scene, incorporating themes of the death and insanity of the ghost nightmares into morbid tale of the Black Cat was included superstition, insanity, murder. One of the stories written in the style that originally appeared on August 19th, 1843, the issue Saturday Evening Post. Reviewing the reading short studies now provided the same way with the textbook with a reading selection. For those reading the head note with the one above, provides context reading the story. The head note answers the following question: in which style of the function does the story fit? What do you think would suggest the possible subject of the story? Then probably dark gothic. Make connections. A superstitious person having some superstitions you may have an effect with the behavior. Reading tip of your reader ask for what point of view of the story being told. What does the point of view answer for the author say with a surprise from the story last paragraph. Also look for the details reflect the sad and tragic life of the author. Alright, The Black Cat for the most wild. This is Edgar Allan Poe. For the most wild, yet most homely narrative which I am about to pen with the nearly expected nor solicit believe the man indeed would I be expected in a case where the very sense of the rejection of their own evidence, yet mad I am not. You very, very surely do I not dream, but tomorrow I die, and today I would unbreathen my soul have made my immediate purpose of the place before the world plainly sufficient without comment, as here is a mere household events, and the consequence of these events have terrified, the tortured, and have destroyed me. You will not attempt to expound to me the presented little but hour too many that which will seem less terrible than Barcuse. Hereafter, perhaps some intellectual may find with which would produce the phantomism, the common belief of some of the intellectual, more calm, more logical, very far less acceptable than their own, which may perceive the circumstance of the deal with nothing more than ordinary succession, very natural cause and effect. For infancy, because I know that the docile humanity of my disposition, my tenderness of the heart, was even as conspicuous as to make me the jest of my companions. I was especially fond of the animals. I indulged my parents with a great variety of pets. With these, I most of my time never so happy feeding my caressing them. Particularly a character grew on my growth, and in my manhood I derived from it the principal sort of the pleasure of those of the cherished and affection of the faithful and sagest dog. I never needed hardly to be with the trouble to explain with the nature of the intent of the gratification of the derivable. There is something of the unleashed for the self-sacrificing love of the brute which goeth directly to the heart of him who has the frequent occasion of the paltry for your friendship, a gossamer, something delicate or insubstantial infidelity of a mere man. I married early and was happy to find in my wife's disposition was uncongenial with my own, observing that my partial with the domestic pet, for the now opportunity procuring those from the most agreeable kind, what kinds of birds, goldfish, fine dogs, rabbits, and small monkeys, and a cat. This later was remarkable. Large, beautiful animal with entirely black sages into an alternate, astonishing degree with the speak of the intelligence to my wife without a heart, with a little, with tinctured with superstition, made frequent allusion with the ancient poor popular notion, which regarded all black cats, which is in disguise. Note that she was ever serious upon the point I mentioned, that the matter of all no better reason than that it happens, and just not now to be remembered. Pluto, this was the cat's name, my favorite pet and playmate. I alone have fed him, and he attended me where I went about the house. It was even difficult that I could prevent him from following me through the streets. Or a fiend impertinence. The name of the narrator gave his disease alcoholism, a fiend of demon, evil spirit, intemperance, with a lack of moderation. Our friendship lasted in a manner of several years, driven by the general determinate character through the instrumental field interpermanence. Had I blushed and confessed that experience with the radical attention of the worst, I grew day by day, but the more moody, more irritable, more regardless of the feelings of the others. I suffered myself with the intemperature language of my life. I left a language that often offered personal violence at moment. My pet, of course, who made me feel change in my disposition, not only neglected it, but I ill-used them. The Pluto, however, I still retained sufficient regard to restrain from me for the maltreating him, as I made no sculptural maltreating the rabbits, the monkeys, or even the dog, but when by accident or through affection. There came in my way, but the disease grew up upon me, for the disease is like alcohol, and the length, even Pluto, who's now becoming old, is consequently somewhat peevish. Even Pluto began experiencing the effects of my ill temper. One night, returning home with much intoxicated from one of my haunts about the town, I fancied that the cat avoided my presence. I seized him, and when it was frightened with my violence, he inflicted a slight wound upon my hand, and with his teeth he found with the fury of the demon instantly possessed me. I knew myself no longer. My original soul seemed at once I took to the fight with a flight from my body, and more than fiendish malevolence, gin nurture thrilled everything fiber of my frame. I took the waistcoat, a vest, a pocket with a penknife, and opened it and grabbed the poor beast by the throat and deliberately cut one of his eyes from through the socket. I blush and I burn and I shudder while I pen the damnable atrocity. When reasons returned with the morning, when I had slept off the fumes of the night with the debauch, I experienced a sentimental half an hour with a half remorse for the crime that I have been guilty. But the best, feebly equivocal feeling that his soul remained untouched, and I again plunged active the tomb with drowned all my memory of the deed. In the meanwhile, the cat slowly recovered the socket with the loss, and I presented its truth of its frightful appearance, but no longer appeared to suffer any pain. He went about house of the as usual, but as he might be expected, the field fled extremely terror at my approach. I had so much my old heart left as to be grieved by the vengeful dislike as of the creature that has once loved me, but this feeling soon gave his irritation, and then came as to my final irrevocable overthrow. The spirit of the perverseness of the spirit of philosophy that takes no account, yet I'm no more sure that my soul lived, and I am persuasive that it is one of the primitive impulses of the heart, or human heart, one of the individual primary faculties or sediments that would give the direction of the character of men, who has not hundreds of times found himself committing a vile or silly action, but for no other reason because he knows that he should not. He will not perpetual inclination in the teeth of the best judgment to violate that which was law, merely because of the understanding such. The spirit of perverseness, I say, comes in the final overthrow. It was the unfathomable longing of the soul to vex itself, other violence of its own nature, to do wrong with the wrong's sake only, but the urge may continue to finally consummate with the injury I had inflicted upon the unfound brute. One morning, in cold blood, I slipped a noose about its neck and hung it from a limb from the tree, hung it from the tears streaming from my eyes with a bitterest remorse of my heart, hung it because I knew that it had loved me, and because I had felt given more reason for the offense, hung it because I knew that doing so, it was I was committing a sin, a deadly sin that would be jeopardizing my immortal soul as to the place it is. If such things were possible, even beyond the reach of the infinite mercy of the most merciful, terrible God. One night of a day at which with the cruel deed was done, I was aroused, but one night of the day of which the cruel deed was done, I rose from my sleep by the cry of the fire. Curtains of my beds inflamed. The whole house was blazing. It was great difficulty that my wife, my servant, and myself made our escape of the conflagration. The destruction was complete. My entire worldly wealth was swallowed up, and I resigned myself thenceforth in despair. I'm above weakness, seeking the establishing sequence, cause and effect between the disaster and atrocity. But I am detailing change of facts, which do not believe of the even possible link and imperfect one of the days succeeding in the fire. I visited the ruins on the walls with one exemption had fallen in. The exemption was found with a compartment wall, not very thick, which stood about the middle of the house against the rested head of the bed. Plastering head here gave measure of restriction, resisted the action of the fire with the fact that it attributed with it having been recently spread about the wall. The dense crowd collective of the many of the persons seemed to examine the particular portion of the in the every minute of the eager attention, the strange of the train with the word strange and singular and the other similar expression excited with the curiosity with the approach and saw with the given the bass relief upon the white surface figure of a gigantic cat. The impression was given the accuracy truly with the marvelous. There was a rope about the animal's neck. When first behind an apparition I found scarcely regarded less of my wonder and terror were extreme, but the length of the reflection became into my aid. The cat I remembered I had been hung in the garden adjacent to the house upon when the alarm of the fire of the garden had been immediately filled by the crowd, and someone who the animal must have been cut from the tree, thrown and through it in an open window into my chamber. Then this probably had been done by the view and arousing from my sleep. The falling of the other walls had compressed the victim with the more cruelty substance of the freshly spread plaster of lime in which there had then been flames and ammonia carcasses accomplished with the portrait as I saw it. Although I really accounted my reason for the life not to give the consequence the startling fact of the detail, but I did not less fail to make a deep impression upon my fancy. For months I could not rid myself of the phantomism of the cat, but during the spirit of the day became in my spirit with a half sentiment of the be seen. But it was not remorse. I went as far as to regret the loss of the animal, to look at me and look about me among the vile haunts of which I now habitually frequently another plant of the same species and somewhat similar appearance from which some place. One night I sat and I had half stupefied in the deemed more infamy, which means strong condemnation as a result of shameful act. My attention was suddenly drawn with some black cat reposing the head of one of the immense hogsheads, which means large caskets of barrels of gin or rum, which constituted the chief nature of the apartment. I had been looking steadily with the top of the hogshead for some minutes, and now surprised me the fact that I had been sooner perceived the object. Thereupon I approached it, touched it with my hand. It was a black cat, a very large one, fully as large as Pluto, and closely resembling him in every respect but one. Pluto had not a white hair upon any of the portion of the body, but this cat had a large, although indefinite, splotch of white covering nearly the whole region of the breast. Upon me touching him, and immediately arose poor loudly to rub this against his head, apparently delighted with the notice that it was the very creature that which was in search. I at once offered the purchase landlord, I at once offered to purchase it off the landlord, but the person made no claim to it, and knew nothing of it, and I had never seen it before. I continued to caress and when I prepared to go home, the animal evidence of the disposition accompanying me with permitted me to do so, occasionally stopping and panting as I proceeded. When it reached my house, it domesticated itself at once and became immediately a great favorite with my wife. For my own part, a sound found and dislike arising within me that was just the reverse of what I had anticipated. But now, how or why was it? The evidence finding myself rather disgusted and annoyed by a slow degree of these feelings of disgust and annoyance rose of the bitterness and of hatred. I urged for the creature certain sense of shame and of the remembrance of my former deed of the cruelty, preventing me from the physical abusing it. I did not for some weeks strike or otherwise violently ill use it, but gradually, very gradually, I came to look upon the unutterable loathing of deceit and feel silently from the odious presence as of the breath of the pestilence. 18. When added, no doubt, to my hatred of the breast when it was discovered of the morning after, but home like Pluto, I had been deprived of one when I added no doubt to my hatred of the beast was discovering on the morning that, and after I brought it home, that like Pluto, I had been deprived of it. Had also had been deprived of one of his eyes. His circumstance, however, one endured into my wife, who I was already set and possessed. In a high degree, the humanity feeling of the which had once been distinguishing trait of the many of the simplest of the purest pleasure, for the aversion of the cat, however, declared partially for myself, seemed to increase the follow my step with the persistency which would be difficult to make with a reader with a comprehend, where I sat with the wood crouched beneath with my chair with a spring over the knees, covering me with the loathsome careless that I arose with the work and walked and would get between my feet, thus nearly throwing me down, or fastening his long and sharp claws into my dress, clambering in this manner to my breast, that sometimes I thought I longed to destroy it with a blow. I was yet withheld from doing so, partially it may be the memory of the former crime, but chiefly, let's confess it at once, but absolutely dread the beast. The dread was not exactly dread of physical evil, yet should I lost how otherwise define it, I almost ashamed to own, yes, even in the felon's cell, I am almost ashamed to own it, ashamed to own the terrors in horror with the animal inspired had been heightened by one of the merest shimmers, the monster of my imagination, one's imaginations, which was possible to conceive with my wife, had called my attention more than once to the character mark of the white hair of which I had spoken, which constituted the sole visible difference between the strange beast and the one I had destroyed. The reader will remember that this mark, although large, been originally very indefinite, but slow to degree with its nearly imperceptibility, and with a long time reason struggle with my reject as a fancy I had at length with assumed the rigorous distinction of the outline. I was now the representation object of the shuttered name that adds to the above that I loathed and dread, and would have rid myself of the answer I had I dared I was now, and say the image of the hideous, ghastliest thing of the gallows, or mournful, terrible engine over the horror crime and the agony of death. And now, with indeed, and wretched beyond the wretchedness of my mere humanity, the brute of the beast will fell with a conspicuous distributed a brute beast to work out for me a man fashioned with the image of the high God, so much insufferable woe, all neither day nor night knew. I'm blessing rest as more during the former creature that left me at the moment alone, when the later snorted idly with the dreams of unutterable fear to find with that breath of the thing open upon my face in a vast way with the incarnate with the nightmare that I had power to shake off the incumbent eternally upon my heart beneath the pressure of the torment such of the feeble the remnant with the God with the good with the succumbed with the evil thought that becomes my soul intimate of the darkness most evil thoughts, the modestness of the usual temperature increased with the hatred of all things of all and all of mankind, while the sudden frequent ungovernable outbursts of the fury which I now blindly abandoned myself with my uncomplaining wife, alas, was the most unusual, most patient, suffers. One day she accompanied me upon my household errand on the cellar of the old building in which the poverty compelled us to inhabit. The cat followed me down to the steep stair of the near, throwing me headlong, exuberated me the madness, uplifting the axe and forgetting in my wrath the childish dread in which thereto stayed my hand. I aimed at the blow at the animal, which of course would be proved instantly fatal, had descended as I wished, but the blow was arrested by the hand of my wife, goaded by the inference that into a range more than demoniacal. Rage more than demoniacal. I withdrew my arm from her grasp and buried their axe in her brain. I withdrew my arm from her grasp and buried the axe in her brain. She fell dead upon the spot without a groan. Its hideous murder accomplished, I set myself forth with an entire deliberation task of concealing the body. I knew that I could not remove it from the house, either by day or night, without risking being observed by the neighbors. Many projects entered my mind. At one period, I thought of cutting a corpse into the minute fragments and destroying them with fire, and another resolve of the dig of the grave, of the floor, of the shelf, of the also of the deliberative, with about casting them in the well, in the yard, casting it in the well in the yard, about packing the box of the merchandise, using arrangements, giving the porter, taking it to it from the house. Finally, it hit upon me to consider far better expedition means to an end. Either of these, I determined to wall up in the cellar. I determined to wall it up in the cellar as monks in the Middle Ages recorded to have walled up their victims. For the purpose which the cellar was adapted, it was walled loosely constructed, had lately been plastered throughout with a rough plaster with a damp, and if the atmosphere prevented with a hardening more of the one wall of the projection called the false chimney, her fireplace had been filled up and made to resemble the rest of the cellar. I made no doubt that I could readily display for the bricks of the disappointment instead of the corpse and wall of the instead of the corpse and the wall of the hole was us before, so that no eye could be detected anything suspicious. At the calculation, I was not deceived by means of the crowbar. I easily dislodged bricks, and having carefully deposited the body against the inner wall, I propped it into the position while little trouble the relay with the whole structure originally stood. Having procured mortar and sand and hair with every possible precaution, I pared the plaster and could not be distinguished from the old, from which I very, very carefully went over the new brickwork. When I had finished, I felt satisfied that it was all right. The wall did not present the slightest appearance of having been disturbed. The rubbish of the floor was picked up within minutes of care. I looked around triumphantly and said to myself, "Here at last, then my labor has not been in vain." My next step was to take a look for the beast which I had been the cause of the wretchedness of her. I had length firmly resolved them to put to death. Had I been able to meet with it at the moment, there could have been no doubt of its fate. But it appeared that the crafty animal had been alarmed of the violence previous anger of the forbore its presence itself in my present mood. It's impossible to describe or imagine the deep blissfulness, sense of the relief with the absence of the detested creature occasioned in my bosom. It did not make an appearance during the night, and thus one night at least since the introduction into the house, I suddenly tranquilly slept. I sleep even with a burden of murder upon my soul. A second and third day passed, and still tormentor came not. Once again I breathed as a free man. The monster in terror had fled with the premise forever. I should behold it more. My happiness supreme and the guilt maybe of my dark deed distributed me but little. Some frequent inquiries had been made, but they had been really readily answered. Even search has been instituted, but in the course nothing was discovered, and I looked upon my future felicity as secure. Upon the fourth day of the assassination party of the policy came with the very expected of the health of the proceeding against the maker of the rigorously investigation of the premise, since secure, however, the inscrutable of my place for the concealment of the embarrassment of whatever the officers of the blade bade me and accompanying me from their search, they left no nook or corner unexplored. At the length of the third and fourth time they descended into the cellar, I quivered not in a muscle. My heart beat calmly as one that slumbers in innocence. I walked in the cellar from end to end. I folded my arms from my bosoms and roamed easily to and fro. The police were thoroughly satisfied and prepared to depart. The gleam at my heart was strong and its restraint. I burned to say, if but one word, by one way of triumph, to the rendered doubtfully surely assured of the guiltlessness. "Gentlemen," I said last, and partly ascended with the steps, I'd like to have allayed your suspicions. I wish you all the health and a little more courtesy, but by the by, gentlemen, this is the very well constructed house, and rapid disposure, in a rapid desire to say something easily. I scarcely knew what I had uttered at all. I I scarcely knew what I had uttered at all. I may say, excellently well constructed house. The walls are going, gentlemen. The walls are solidly put together, and here, through the very mere frenzy of the brave bravado, I rapped heavily with the cane I had held in my hand upon even the portion of the brickwork behind the stood of the corpse of my wife, my bosom. But my God shielded and delivered me from the fangs of the arch-fiend, Satan, the chief demon. No sooner had he reverberation of my blows sunk into the silence than I answered the voice within the tomb by a cry, at first muffled and broken like a sob of the children, and then quickly swelling one loud, continuous scream, the utterly anomalous and inhuman of the howl, wheel shaking, half of horror, half of triumph, such as might arise out of hell, conjointly through the throats of the damned in their agony, and the demons of the exalt of damnation. And of many thoughts of the folly to speak, swooning, I staggered the opposite wall for one instant. The party upon the stairs remained motionless unless through extreme terror and awe. The next dozen stout arms were toiling at the wall, and it fell bodily. The corpse, already greatly decayed and clothed with gore, stood erected before the eyes of the spectators. Upon its head, the red extended mouth and solitary eye of fire, sat a hideous beast whose craft had been seduced me into murder, and whose informing voice had consigned me to hangman. I had walled the monster up within the tomb. That's the black cat. So, yeah. We're going to cut the tape there, and we're going to come back. It was kind of long. I don't know how many more pages this is.